I'm Lauren New.
And we're here to talk to you about the graduate essay. Just to tell you a little bit about ourselves, I am a PhD student at Harvard in the physics department. I work with professors Boris Kaczynski and Tim Kaxiris, and I work on computational condensed matter physics. So, in particular, I calculate how chemical reactions proceed on surfaces.
So I'm also a fourth year in the physics department, along with Stephen. I work for Professor Maha Devan, or just Maha, in soft matter and morphometrics,
Yeah, how things bend,
how
right?
things, yeah, shapes of stuff.
Right. It's our pleasure to be here to talk to you about the statement of purpose. And so, without further ado, let's dive right into it. So, the first thing we want to emphasize about the statement of purpose is that it is not like your undergraduate admissions essay, which might be your most recent or sort of vivid memory of an application essay. The SOP is supposed to be something that makes a serious case for your research experience, your research interests, and how you fit into the program that you're applying to. You should keep it brief. It should go one page, maybe one and a half to two absolute max. And throughout this presentation will give you lots of examples of how you should think about your statement of purpose. And so while the principles that we'll tell you about today are general and collated from a lot of advice that we've taken from various sources, from administrators, from professors, remember that rules can always be broken, and every essay will be different. So feel don't worry about making it sound like everybody else's. Try to let your individuality shine through as well, while still adhering to some best practices. So, number one thing to keep in mind when you're communicating in general is to know your audience. Your statement of purpose is going to be read by research professors who are looking for people to join the department as researchers and colleagues. This is one thing that really sets it apart from, for example, your undergraduate statement, which will be read by admissions counselors who need to know about things like high schools in Montana, or like the bassoon or the ballet team. In this case, this is going to be by research professors who will also most likely be within your field. So you can make it technical, and you should also target towards that audience. Um, so one thing that we want to emphasize when you're writing to this audience is that, to put your absolute best foot forward and to feel confident as you write your statement of purpose. For example, we thought it was kind of instructive to look at Harvard's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences mission statement, which says that, they try to identify and attract the most promising students, which is distinctly different from those who are necessarily the most accomplished. No matter what, no matter if you've done research all 3 summers, if you've only been able to dabble in it during the semester, there are many, many ways in which you can demonstrate your promise as a researcher. And so try to write your SOP in the most optimistic and enthusiastic way possible. So target it towards demonstrating your promise as a researcher. Of course, if you have accomplishments, beat that drum as hard as you can. But otherwise, this is something that, look for the best in your own record to put forward to make your case and advocate for yourself. So one thing that really helps when you're writing and rewriting from blank page to final draft is to ask yourself if the things in your statement of purpose are answering the question, would this student be valuable as a researcher in my group? Because this is what the professors reading your SOP will be thinking and trying to answer for themselves. And so, again, we'll talk more in the following slides about how you can make this case and provide evidence to support this claim.
So some things that you should think about when you're writing your SOP, at least in the beginning, of course, as Stephen just said, focus on your research. This is by far the bulk of your SOP. But that being said, you've already really done the hard part of, working summers and during the semester in labs and like learning, reading papers. So writing it up for the SOP is actually not the hard part, and in fact can be uh, even formulaic in some cases. So what you're going to spend most of your time and energy on here is really actually crafting the story that connects these experiences and shows how these experiences shaped you and your research trajectory moving forward. Another thing you're going to have to think about when you're writing is deciding on why a given institution is a good fit for you. So why are you applying to this given school and department? Because again, it's individual research professors who are going to be reading your essays. And so they're going to be asking, will this student be a good fit for me and for my department? And so fit and match between you and them is really the key to actually getting the green light.
Yeah.
So that being said, we've given you uh, basically what you should do, but how far can you go in including personal details about yourself that aren't part of your research? And so, really, and we're going to come back to this, but it's really best if you keep your non scientific personal experience to a minimum or as a secondary player here. Um, and we want to emphasize that every detail you bring up, even if it is something more personal about you, should ultimately still tie back into your interest and your qualification for this program. That being said, it doesn't mean that everything has to be like a given research project. Specifically, for instance, if there are facts about yourself, like you're a first generation student, um, first person in your family to go to college or to pursue a research career, this really does say something about your tenacity as a scientist, and having a different background that can, you know, really actually be helpful as you're pursuing your research. Other things, maybe like if you build things in your spare time, if you have experience writing code, writing technical specifications, managing a group, all of these things are relevant to actually getting research done. And so, even though they're not necessarily like, oh, I did this research that led to this paper in like a physics group, um, they still do make that case for you that you would be a great researcher in a physics group. And so you can use these unique experiences to actually stand out in the pile.
And if I may interject, one of the things that you should keep in mind as you bring up these experiences that are less, obviously, okay, I was in a lab doing X,
Mm-hmm.
with test tubes, beakers, and pipettes, is that if you're going to bring up this information and you believe that it really, it speaks to your qualification and your tenacity as a scientist, make sure that you say so.
Mm-hmm.
The people reading these applications are, going to be, they'll have read 30 before yours, they'll read 30 more afterwards. And so the easier you can make it for the audience to understand how the data you're bringing up, how the evidence that you're mounting ties back to the case you're making for yourself, the more successful your application is likely to be. So if you're going to mention, that you're first gen or something, it wouldn't hurt to add a line like, not just like, okay, why are they telling me this? Don't give them the chance to wonder that. You can
Right.
just say like, I have, I'm the first in my family and I really am serious about pursuing a scientific career. And my inspiration, my drive is what's pushing me to be to be the first one. And this is part of what sets me up for success in graduate school, like just tie it back and make it
Definitely.
explicit, because don't just give them two and two. You need to give them two and two and say, by the way, that equals
Equals.
four. Yeah.
Right. And so again, this goes back to most of your work in crafting this SOP is going to be making those connections
Right.
rhetorically for your reader
Right.
because they have your transcript and your CV and so on. And
Hmm.
so this is really the place for you to make that into a narrative.
Yeah. Okay. So now in this part of the talk, we're going to loop through some of the ingredients of a successful statement of purpose. And so again, every SOP will be different, but these are some common things that successful ones will and have had in common. So I think one of the most important things is a succinct explanation of why you want to go to graduate school. After all, when you call it a statement of purpose, this is your statement of your purpose. So if you already know that you want to be a professor, if you want to work in a national lab, if you'd like to take your skills to industry, or if you just think a PhD will prepare you to do independent research that you hope to spin off into completely novel and interesting career directions, say so. And also, at the same time, you don't have to necessarily have it etched into, stone or anything. But if you have an idea already, definitely make sure that don't let it be lost in the committee, because this helps to demonstrate, if you happen to do know the answer, this helps to really demonstrate that clarity of purpose, that drive, and that sort of ambition, which will carry you through, into, through, and beyond graduate school. Now, this one's very important, a full accounting of your research background. So definitely if you've done research in the past, and those skills are in your toolbox now, you have to tell the committee what those were and what you learned from them, and also, if possible, what you took away from it. That is to say, in the form of deliverables, such as a paper, conference presentation, delivering a poster. At this point, I believe we got a question about this. Posters, conference talks, they all count. Ways of disseminating the research that you've done are part of your research experience. And even if you haven't had super extensive research experience, you can also make the case for things that are sort of research adjacent, which could, for example, include extensive class projects that you've done. For example, if you did some derivations, if you wrote some code, if you built a small device, all of these things evidence your ability to work independently in a lab-like context.
If you
Lauren.
had a reading class with a professor or like an advanced seminar, those are also good things you can include.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, so other science-related accomplishments can also be relevant to your SOP insofar as they show that you are dedicated, enthusiastic, and passionate about science, while also getting training in communicating your science, which is a very, very important part of grad school and beyond. So this can include, being a TA, doing scientific outreach, etc. We recommend only giving this, we'll come back to this again. I recommend, giving this maybe like 1 or 2 paragraphs to really keep the focus on the research as you go. But because it does say something about your enthusiasm as a scientist, if you have this, it's certainly relevant to bring up. And it helps to make the case, as well as giving the committee a bigger picture of you. Now, speaking of giving the committee, sort of that personal portrait, if you have any personal circumstances that you're concerned about that are reflected in some way on, sort of you on paper, which can include any number of circumstances, such as if you had a rough semester in college, which, resulted in low grades, or if you had like a rough year because of something that was happening in your personal life or related to, your college experience, if you had to take time off for one reason or another, if you've changed majors, if you have an unconventional background, which can include, coming back to school after a substantial time off, or trying to pivot back into physics after having done something else. All of these things, we encourage mentioning them in some way or touching upon them in the statement of purpose. And because this is a sensitive topic, we'll come back to it in a bit to give some concrete examples of how you can talk about it in a way that is much more likely to help you. So what we'll say in particular is how to bring it up, how to sort of make it sort of work for you. And ultimately, the reason to talk about these is because you get to control the way in which the admissions committee views these facts, which are simply on the record that they can then interpret otherwise. Again, this is your story, so the ball is in your court. When you're bringing this up, you're controlling you're getting in front of the story, you're controlling how they read your narrative and your story. That's powerful. That's not something to leave on the table, for
And this is
sure.
something we'll talk about in more depth later.
Absolutely. Um, one other thing you can do is to tailor it slightly to individual university departments. So you don't have to take a lot of time on this, but if there are professors at a given institution that you're most excited about working with, absolutely mention them. There's a high probability that they'll end up seeing your essay at some point. Another way in which this is quite unlike undergrad admissions, that these are pretty individualized sometimes. Furthermore, if there's a piece of equipment there, or there's for example, a fruitful partnership with a national lab, like with Maryland and NIST, for example, you could also mention that as something that is a particular drawing point to a given university. And also, you know, perhaps it's obvious, but we'd like to, remind you to also just keep, make sure that you're addressing what the prompt asks for. So, just read the dang prompt. It'll take you a few extra minutes, of course, but it's common, to assume that if you're applying to 9 schools that they all had identical prompts. There might be a subtle difference in that ninth school that actually, you might want to, slightly tune your SOP around. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to go through some examples of each of these in turn. So first, we're going to talk about an explanation of why you want to go to graduate school. Now, during the workshop portion of this, we paused to let people study these examples and see what they liked or didn't like. I'd offer you to pause here if you'd like to take a look and think about what you like and what you do not like about this paragraph. We'll launch into our sort of analysis of it now. So notice that this paragraph begins right out the gate. Oh yeah, by the way, also in the essay that we drew this from, this is the very first paragraph of the statement. So we come out the gate swinging. The very first sentence is a statement of purpose. I want to conduct research and train the next generation of scientists as a professor at a research university. The next sentence takes us right into addressing this statement with, okay, I want to conduct research and train, da da da. Why? My drive to become an academic scientist began in high school, comma, during my first da 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 da. Okay, a research experience is brought up, and then we learned that Dr. Blank developed optics for cancer treatment and therapy monitoring. Witnessing a prototype laser control system in use for dynamic therapy, da 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 da, helped me see unambiguously how science could go from the lab to improving quality of life. So this is further answering the question of why this applicant appreciates the scientific process and is interested in a career in research. And then finally, this fourth sentence, or whatever, this final sentence, brings us home by putting a bow on the rest of the paragraph while building off the previous one and tying back to the beginning. I feel a sense of purpose in my research, knowing that work done in academia can break ground in fields that will have a transformative role in everyday living. And so this sort of substantiates the previous sentence. Anything I missed, Lauren? Okay, so we're going to have two examples of how to talk about your research background. Feel free to pause if you want to take a look. So here we see my research was conducted under the guidance of blank on the dynamics of the lipid membrane. Our goal was to understand how parameters such as temperature, pressure, and increased amount of cholesterol affect rigidity and rotational motion of our phospholipid monolayer. So note that already we've learned some pretty good biographical facts here. We know who the research was conducted with, and we know what the objective of the research was, as well as a broad statement of the research topic. Now, we've gotten one sentence on who, one sentence on what, no, on why. Now we have a sentence on what, sorry, let me try that again. Well, we have who, we have why, now we have what. We were able to find that the increased pressure, at increased pressure, there's an overall reduction of rotational motion in our lipid monolayer, and we get the so what finally. The research resulted in co-authorship on a publication. Now, just a few things to point out. So note that the paragraph is written without a thorough explanation of what the science was, but simply, just a high level, although technical explanation of what was done. Whenever you're talking about your research, you should write it in such a way that an expert would be able to sort of read it and understand at a high level what you've done. And so you can also check with graduate students, postdocs, or professors, or even your friends to make sure that this scans. Also, one sentence in this paragraph is bolded. It's the takeaway. It's the deliverable. And so this is the thing that the student decided that they wanted to make sure that their admissions committee did not miss, which was the follow through, the sort of punchline to the research. Yeah, so did I miss anything, Lauren?
No, I think that's about right.
Oh, yeah.
You can also see through these examples that it's basically just a very brief summary of what they did, right?
Right.
So they didn't have to like add a lot of purple prose to that or anything. They
Right.
just it's straightforwardly laid out,
Yeah.
and that is plenty.
Yeah. This feels like a grad school podcast. Okay, so now in this statement, feel free to pause if you'd like to take a look.
Also,
Oh,
these paragraphs are all taken from example essays that should be included with the folder that all this was distributed
yes,
from.
that's right. Yes, we forgot to mention that. And also, all of these were parts of successful applications here at Harvard. So yes, these are indeed successful SOPs. Okay, so with this paragraph, so we see a similar sort of like structure where we first learn who the student worked with and then what the research was, as well as the purpose, to identify molecular components in solution to determine whether the optics of a phone camera were sufficiently powerful. So we get an explanation of what the student did, again, created an apparatus that attached to a phone with an assortment of 3D parts, and we also see the student assigning themselves credit. This is very important. We learned that the student is the one who designed the 3D printed parts, that even the mundane parts of research were carried out, which were, this person was leafing through the Thor Labs catalog, put in the order, got the lab snacks, wrote code that supported their device, and then trained employees on the concepts and design of the system. So all of this really helps to build the case that the student can sort of supervise a research project, but also communicate critical parts of it to other people. This is a huge green light. I think that, this would be exciting to any professor reading this statement. And again, the only reason that I, the reader, know this is because the applicant told me that they did all of this great work. So don't forget to give yourself credit. Um, and so also in the final paragraph, or sorry, the final sentence, we see the student also contextualize the research in, first of all, they literally spell it out. The research was successful. They say so. That's nice. Now I don't even need to wonder it. Why? Because they told me. Improving the concept, and we're looking at next steps for possible applications. So we also thought this was nice because it shows that research doesn't have to necessarily lead to a conference talk or a publication to be successful. The student tells us what the criteria for success was and why this project met it, which was really nice. Okay, so talking about other science-related accomplishments, feel free to pause if you want to take a look. So here we see another nice sort of statement of purpose. I am determined to make science more accessible to young students and help foster curiosity about science. Okay, sounds good. What we also see after that is immediate substantiation of those facts. Like, I've been committed to science outreach to young students since my first year of college when I tutored math at blank elementary blank and encountered students who believed science and math were too hard and too boring. And so that's one whole sentence of just substantiation of the first claim of this paragraph. And then we get another one, as well as a sort of like humble brag, like a frank statement of the facts, which is I became president of my Society of Physics Students chapter. We didn't hear the story of how they ran. We didn't have to hear any other details. Just, I became president of SBS, and then I used my position to begin science outreach to elementary schools in the area. So at this point, around this point, we got a question about how do you talk about things like this, things which are accomplishments of the sort of, I was president of SBS, or perhaps you founded an SBS chapter, or maybe you did some science communication. So basically, the sort of test for this is if, and it's also, I mean, this is something that is hard for me. This is hard for a lot of people, is talking about your successes, your accomplishments, and your achievements. Um, when you bring them up in your essay, you basically can't go wrong if you bring them up similarly to how you would mention it on a resume, which is it happened. For this research, I was awarded a prize. For this research, I gave a talk. It was accepted for publication in this journal. Maybe, you could shy away from like more, laudatory or superlative terms like this excellent
This
research or
shows how great of
yeah,
a person I
the
am.
show the my ingenious research was published in, no, but like a frank statement of the facts, you cannot go wrong in doing so. This is the time to put those facts in. And if you're on the fence about, over or under selling yourself, throw
Get
yourself
off
on
the
the over
fence.
side. Yeah, jump on that over side. You want to, you really want to put the best version of yourself forward.
And
um
and this is in some sense your opportunity to do it in your application because the rest of it, is more or less there.
Right. We receive messaging all the time to be humble, to not brag, to not show off. This is not, this is the time to show off, like, to sort of show off a little, like, show talk about your work and be proud of it. Really.
Definitely
Yeah.
own it.
No note of apology. We'll talk about that later, no excuse, you just show like this is what I did and I'm happy with it. Okay, right. So now talking about a limited personal explanation, if you have any circumstances that you're concerned about. So we like this example. We thought it was particularly masterful, just like as a piece of rhetoric, and we'll walk through why. Okay. So, what is the arc of a story, right? We open with the status quo, we get a once upon a time, we have a statement of a problem, then we learn how a person solved the problem, and then, we all live happily ever after. Like that's just a template for stories, period. And so here it is, how does this map onto that mold? The beginning first two sentences are a very frank statement of the problem. The transition from college to high school was difficult. My math and science preparation was incomplete, and my time was limited due to work study obligations. So this tells you kind of what you need to know about why, this helps to contextualize, why, for example, a student might have had a semester or two with, some rough with a rough patch, or like, perhaps a lower GPA than one might have liked. But after we learn, sort of what the problem was and what the origins were, namely, work study was, a time suck and the transition to college from high school was tough, we get right into how the student overcame it. Nevertheless, I was able to overcome these obstacles and complete my bachelor's degree in physics. We also get a statement of how the student decided to try to better their circumstances. In an attempt to give myself the opportunity to improve my background, I decided to apply and enroll into the blank. Since joining the program, I've maintained a 3.92 GPA while taking the majority of my courses at blank, founding the blank, and initiating an additional project at blank along with my master's thesis. So we just get a waterfall of like really cool accomplishments, as well as, this is what's bolded. What's bolded was not the problem, the hardship, the setbacks. What's bolded is the follow through, the desire to improve, and the fulfilled effort to improve. And also, we can kind of get the sense that maybe the student had, due to a difficult high school transition, a low GPA for a patch there. Do we know what that GPA is? No. The number that we do see, the number that gets to stick with the reader, is 3.92, a GPA that would be enviable for anybody. Um, Again, most of the paragraph is dedicated to the positive takeaways. We get the student simultaneously getting in front of the story, saying like, look, the beginning of college was rough for a few reasons, but that's not who's applying. The person who is applying is an A student who has done all kinds of great stuff over the last year or so. um, anyway, again, for as many applicants, with personal explanations that they want to give, there will be, as and different ways to do so. But hopefully, this can give you a sense of how you might want to go about it. Um, Okay, so now that was sort of an accounting of different ingredients of the SOP. Now we'll do a sort of deep dive into one short paragraph to give you some ideas about elements of style. Okay, so this is a fake paragraph that we this is a fake paragraph that we wrote up, describing a hypothetical student's research experience. So let's read it. In summer 2018, I did an RU at U Rochester. This was a great experience and I learned a lot about atomic physics. I had never had experience in numerical simulations before, so we weren't able to finish the project while I was there. We eventually wanted to publish it. Working with computers was interesting, and I want to continue doing this in grad school. Okay, so let's give credit where it's due. There's a few things that this paragraph kind of starts to do right, where we learn at least where they did the research. We can indirectly glean that, okay, they were working on something related to atomic physics, and it was presumably a theoretical slash computational project because numerical simulations are mentioned. We learned that the project wasn't finished, but we also get kind of an implicit promise that it will be completed, as in we eventually want to publish it. Also, true to what we had said earlier, it dials back into the purpose for graduate school, which is working with computers was interesting, and I want to continue doing this in grad school. So we have some sort of also promise, like, hey, this research was relevant to me because I think, I want my future research to model on it in some way. Now, let's talk about a few things that this paragraph could have done better. So first of all, something's missing. We don't know who the student worked for. Again, professors in your field are going to be reading this paragraph, and so they might know, they'll most likely know the territory, and there's a good chance that they've heard of a professor that you've working for. Definitely, they might have gone to grad school, they might have run into each other at conferences, they might have had positive interactions outside, and they also might just, let's just start with the fact that they might know what that research in the lab looks like. So definitely don't forget to mention who you worked for. Second thing is that we get a sense of the field and the method, but we don't actually know what was done that summer. So we don't necessarily, a research professor reading this might not be so certain that the experience that was done would or would not fit into their research program. Also, even though, the student is mentioning two things that can be empirically completely true, which is that they had never had experience with numerical simulations or that the project wasn't finished. Again, I had a summer where I never had experience with numerical simulations, where we also didn't finish our project. But don't use the ink in your paragraph to mention it in a sort of, a way that might strike a tone of apology, like, this fact, never had experience before, is offered with a comma, so we weren't able to finish the project. So it's mentioned as kind of like a justification as to why the project wasn't able to be finished. There's no need to talk about it like that.
In fact, that's almost always the case anyway.
Yeah, right. Let's start there. Yeah, like not finish, like a soup to nuts, project in one summer is pretty rare. So there's no need to sell yourself short or offer a negative spin on your own work. And we'll talk about how we could tighten this up in just a second. Finally, also using breezy or colloquial language. U Rochester or grad school. In general, sometimes, things like, minor colloquialisms here and there are like part of like a personal touch and a voice, but you basically won't go wrong erring on the side of hyperformality in your writing. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean, jargon, but just means like, keeping it as sort of formal as possible. Okay, let's talk about how we can sort of tighten up this paragraph, looping through in succession. So we could say, I did an RU Rochester in the group of Nicholas Bigelow. Now we know now we know the who, and now we also get the what. Working on numerical simulations of the Bose-Einstein condensates by solving the Gross-Pitaevsky equation. So again, yeah, this is like a nice frank statement of what was done. Now, instead of using the same sentence to say, well, I'd never done numerics before, so we weren't able to finish, let's just spend that ink and that space in your SOP on what we did. We have preliminary results on a 2-species BEC and plan to continue collaborating on the work and complete a manuscript. So that follow through is important to mention that we're going to finish it, but this also sort of acknowledges that progress was made. And also, by the way, don't forget, like, again, we've been harping on this theme throughout this entire talk, but, what does preliminary results mean? Preliminary results can mean a Python figure that shows that your code is working in the simplest possible case. That is a preliminary result. It doesn't have to be manuscript ready. It doesn't need to be ready for the wider world. If it's just, showing, like any sort of like intermediate results along the way, own it. That's the whole point. You're learning how to generate those results. So take a positive spin. And then finally, a more formal and precise style. So University of Rochester instead of U Rochester. And talking about, okay, I enjoyed working in computational AMO physics and hope to continue working on similar projects in graduate instead of grad school. So yeah, now, if you'd like, you can pause here to just sort of see, like, this is the same research experience, same student, but we hope you agree that, in the sort of, not to make a meme out of it, but you can really see the contrast between the presentation style and how, again, same student's experience. You should look at all of your paragraphs, be like, okay, how can I take this to the next level? Am I doing the best job I can of presenting it as, making the strongest possible case for myself? And I really hope that this sort of exercise helps you with that. So to also comment a little bit on formatting, make sure that your essay is broken up into well-formatted paragraphs. At this point, we got a question about, does the essay have to be chronological? Should I necessarily start with freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year research experiences? Answer, well, there's no hard and fast rule. Just make sure that you have an organization that talks about, what you've, that sort of makes the case in a certain way. I could, imagine that one essay might look like I did numerical work first, then junior summer I did experimental work, and I learned a lot about working in the lab and about, doing literature searches and stuff. But I think in grad school, I want to continue doing theory stuff. So in which case, maybe it might make sense to say put the experimental side first, but then talk about how, like, I did my experiment rotation junior year, but the theory was what I really liked, and put that near the back of the essay, as you sort of segue into, and here's why I'm applying to Duke, to Princeton, to Stanford, etc. Because I want to work with X theory
Or
professors.
even doing it what you said, but in reverse, so
Yeah,
that what you want to do is right up front.
yeah,
So there are a couple ways to organize it.
right.
Again, this goes back to just crafting your story, what makes the most sense for, you know, linking your different experiences together.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no one way to do it. But we just hope that, we can give you the tools to think about it. And so one way to sort of like, test yourself is, first of all, like, is your essay organized like sort of in a rhetorical way? Like, are your statements being immediately followed up with supporting details? If you were to take
Abstract.
if you were to take the first sentence of every paragraph and sort of, move them into their own, make like a meta abstract, like a meta paragraph for your essay that's just made up of the first sentence of each paragraph. If that covers the big picture beats that you're sort of hitting, in your essay, then that might suggest that you have a cogent, coherent organization. Um, and this is one of those tricks that, no one necessarily will tell you, but it's something not to leave on the table. You can use tasteful text stylizing to help guide your reader's eye. You can use bold font to draw your reader's attention to important sentences, right? If you sit back, look at your essay from a bird's eye view and say, okay, if someone's in a rush, they've read 30, they're about to read 30 more, and they're about to break for lunch, what are the things that I want the reader to take away, to not miss? Which are one, I love science. I have been, active in science communication. I have already done, 2 years of research in the same undergrad lab. And, I've had a really great time there. And I've also presented that work at a conference, and in grad school, I want to do blank, right? Bold, like figure out where you say those and bold them. You know what I mean? Like make the takeaways clear. Make it easy for your reader to take them away. And the bold font, honestly, it's a win-win because then they get the info that you want them to get and you've communicated your message successfully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
You can also use things like section headings, even if you want to break it up like that, like
Yeah.
research background, personal
Right.
background, like
Right. Yeah,
that kind of thing.
nothing stopping you from doing that either. Yeah.
But definitely you don't want to give them a wall of words.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They might prefer that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, now I'll hand the baton back to Lauren.
So we talked earlier about dealing with red flags in this kind of like personal circumstances paragraph. And so we just want to elaborate a little bit on that some more because many of you had them. I had one in my application,
I had one too.
and you don't want to just kind of leave it there. So if you had like, if you failed a class or you had like a missing semester, that will be reported on your transcript or somewhere else in your application, and you don't want to just leave that there for the admissions committee to. You don't want to give them room to kind of see that and then you know
You're
possibly.
taking, oh, if I may, you're taking a
Yeah,
gamble. They can interpret it in any way they want, colored by whatever, their
biases
mood.
they might have.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, their
yeah,
mood. Right? Like, right? Are they hungry? Like, is it the last essay? Whatever. Like,
yeah.
are they? Yeah,
And in some sense, by not addressing it somewhere else in your application, specifically your SOP, you're also just sending the implicit message that I'm not ready to deal with whatever it
hmm
was, whatever
Yeah.
this red flag might have been. And
Right.
the committee will see it and they'll, ask questions about it. And so in your SOP, you do want to find a way to address whatever these red flags are, but you want to do it very briefly, you want to do it very frankly, and also, probably most importantly, is you want to show how you've come back from these obstacles. This is really not the place to expand on it, in I want
Like
to say a
extreme depth.
sympathetic,
Yeah.
yeah, way. You just kind of want to put it out there, like, yes, I acknowledge that this happened. Here's what I've been doing to, come back from it.
Right. And again, the sort of justification for this attitude is that again, the statement is about you. It's about you as you're applying to grad school, as you as you will be a graduate student. And it's not necessarily about your hardship or your difficulty or the rough patch, whatever, the red flag, whatever the red flag may be. It and if you spend too much time on it, you take the focus away from yourself. When you bring it up, it's to say something about you,
Right.
right?
And so this is your chance to really, yeah, again, get in front of the story and basically interpret whatever that red flag may be for your reader.
Right,
Um,
exactly. Yeah,
and
getting
tell
right.
them basically, this experience on the whole, including the red flag at the beginning, ultimately says something positive about me as a potential research student. And it's also important throughout this whole process that it's not worth lying about. I think there's almost no circumstance I can think of where it would be worth, trying to cover up a red flag.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you
especially in
don't
an
feel like you have
academic
to lie.
setting, yeah, there's generally just not a reason to do it. It's better served by just addressing it positively and frankly. And so this, we just want to bring again your attention back to this paragraph that we showed you earlier, but we think again is like a really great example of how to deal with this kind of thing. And so, you know, this student had a very rough time in college, had a GPA that just they weren't very proud of. Um, but again, it's about how they moved forward from it. And so their explanation of what happened, their acknowledgement of the red flag was like, yes, it was difficult. My preparation was incomplete. My time was limited for a very good reason. Although it doesn't get too personal about it. And then it talks about it almost in a very kind of flat, objective tone.
Just the facts.
Yes, just the facts. That's what happened. But then it spends, again, the majority of this paragraph is about how they've come back from it, what they've been doing to improve their circumstances actively, and basically just how they've been kicking butt ever since then.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a really great example, again, of just how to get in front of that and in some sense make it work for you. So there's also a pretty big list that we've gotten from faculty about what not to do in your SOP. That being said, there is a lot of room, I think you can agree, of, you know, making your SOP personal and but there's just some things that you probably want to avoid that's worth taking the 10 minutes or whatever to maybe not put in. Of course, number one is not addressing the prompt. Read the stupid prompt. Just before you submit any application, I mean, for any, not even grad
like in
school,
general,
just like
yeah.
a job application or whatever, just make sure that you're addressing what the questions that they ask, because it's really annoying to go through.
Right.
And we put this question out for you to answer, and you didn't answer it.
Yeah, don't give them a reason to just throw you off the stack. Like, oh, cool, they use the same statement they use for 15 other schools. Great, they don't really care about this. No, I mean, like, that you could still really care about it. You know what I mean? It could just have been an honest mistake, but you don't know what the audience is going to think, and so just attend to their needs very very studiously.
And so we think we gave you, as far as an outline for an SOP goes, like very good guidelines that will apply for the vast majority of physics and physics adjacent departments. But again, you just want to check that you have covered everything that they asked for. Also, I don't think we put this in the slides, but it happens more often than you think if someone says, you know, I look forward to, you know, I would love to get into, you know, Yale University when the prompt is for Harvard. University.
Yeah.
It happens much more often than you think, and it's kind of an immediate like.
Yeah. So actually, I think something that I did was before I sent out some SOPs, I control F'd like the name of a few other universities just to make absolutely certain. Or like I was like, okay, my SOP says the name of the school like 3 times. So I punch in Caltech. I'm like, I should see 3 results come up. If I get said 2, it's like, there's a CU Boulder lurking, or there's a Maryland lurking in there.
And the thing is, it's such a stupid thing, right? It's obviously not the greatest reason for like.
Right. Like you could still be a phenomenal graduate student. Sorry, yeah.
So really, it's just worth taking like the 10 seconds.
Yeah.
That it takes to make sure you don't.
That's right.
Mess that up. Moving forward, slightly broader, so just voice, diction, style, spelling errors, bad grammar. These really reflect poorly. And so if, for instance, English is your second language, definitely get a native speaker to help you out. I mean, it's not a big deal. It won't take long.
Yeah.
And, you know, ask us as well.
Yeah.
If that's something you need help with. But just, you know, or just everyday mistakes that many of us make. Before you submit your essay, just read it out loud to yourself. Read it backwards. Another good way, like literally the last sentence, and then the second to last sentence, and then, you know, going all the way up, so you don't just kind of gloss over a mistake that, you know, your brain would normally just kind of fill in the right
because
reading.
it gets harder and harder to read something with fresh eyes the longer you've been staring at it. And so
Definitely.
reading backwards actually breaks that up. You know what I mean? Like you know
Mm-hmm.
what it like you read the first three words of the sentence, you're like, okay, okay, I know what I want to say. And then you just, move on to the next one and you miss
Yeah.
the typo, like
And
happens
these
to me a
really
million times.
stand
Yeah.
out, like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Right.
um, to admissions committees, and they're
Hmm.
so easy to avoid.
Yeah.
Um, Again, as Stephen said, informal language, you Rochester, cool, or
Hmm.
just,
You Rochester is cool.
yeah. Um,
No joking.
and I think in the both in the style section and in the example essays that we uh, provide to you in these slides and elsewhere, like those are good examples of kind of the level of formality to use. That being said, you don't want to conflate that with having to use unnecessary jargon or buzzwords or making things like overcomplicated. These are being read by research professors and they wade through this crap every day. And so it can also be a bad look if you end up sounding like slick or like,
Hmm.
you're trying to oversell the science, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, I would just have a you could if you think you're going a little too buzzwordy,
Hmm.
you just get a friend to look at it. Get a grad
Yeah,
student, get a
your
postdoc at your
advisor.
advisor,
Yeah,
etc. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably something most of you don't have to worry about, but keep
Right.
that in mind.
And your technical explanations of your project will most likely not have this problem.
Right.
Like this is not a reason to be shy about using a technical term when you're like Gross-Pitayevsky equation,
Yeah,
density functional
definitely.
theory. No, just use it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's relevant.
So again,
Yeah.
I think it's best by example,
Yeah.
like uh, some of the ones that we showed you
Hmm.
earlier. Also, what not to do, writing essays that sound like they're written generically. Um, so you might want to subject your essay to the chalk test. So if we took your name off the top, would we still be able to know from your experiences and from how they reflected, like through your writing on you as a person now? So would we be able to tell from that it was yours? Because again, you're dealing with admissions committees who are reading hundreds of these essays, within like a couple days, and you do want to stand out. You want to make the case like I would be a great scientist and researcher, and I'm also just, an interesting person. I'm not just like a robot who,
I, I think also this, oh, if I may,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, thank you, Lauren. I think that a big reason to do this is just again like is the focus on you, like because
yeah,
you could say things that are universal and again things that are absolutely true, like I love science. I think the scientific process is so interesting. It's like I just love being in lab every day. That's why I want to be a grad student. All my research experiences to date have shown me this, whether I'm pipetting or I'm developing a detector for like neutrino physics and like all of those things, if unsubstantiated by your own story,
mm-hmm.
run the risk of belonging to, three
Anybody,
different people. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like if your essay could only have been written by you alone, that means that you're doing a good job. Like
yeah,
you're on the right track.
right.
That's like, yeah. But so everything Lauren said is absolutely true. Sorry to cut you
No,
off.
no, no,
Yeah.
definitely. And we'll actually get back to that in just a second as well. But one last thing is you also don't want to go overboard with the purple prose here. Um, be kind to your reader, just like short declarative sentences that really direct forward. You don't want
Hmm.
to get lost in
Right.
just flowery metaphors and that kind of thing, because
Right.
that's not the purpose of this essay, is to, show off your
Yeah.
literary side as much as your just,
Another thing which differentiates the SOP from your undergraduate admissions essay. And again, remember, just every paragraph, every sentence in your essay has a job. The job is to prove that you would be an
a great,
awesome researcher
yes,
and a grad student. And so make sure it's doing that job and not any other one.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Sorry, I
there's
just love these. I like these.
there have been some cliches that have come up as, they've just been done so many times at this point that it's worth, you know, make a new cliche.
Yeah.
instead of doing one
Yeah.
of these,
Right, right, right.
how proud you would be if you were admitted into a given school or program. It's, I mean, first of all, it's just wasted ink. Like, you
Yeah.
could use that space to actually say something more concrete about your accomplishments and yourself.
Right. Again, see
Um,
earlier, every sentence has a job.
yeah.
Right.
Uh,
And again, I don't know if they'll necessarily hold this against you per se, but just
it's just,
it's like just give yourself like use the space for to give yourself more points.
yeah,
You know what I mean? As it's like empty calories. You know what I mean?
yeah. Another thing that's also more common than you may think, sentences that start like, since I was 5, I first looked up at the stars and I
Hmm.
knew I wanted to be an astrophysicist.
Yeah.
This is just such a common cliche that it's just not worth doing. And again, it goes back to that point about
Right.
being generic. I mean, we
Right.
all have stories about something that sparked our interest in science and, really put us on this path. Um,
Hell yeah. Like
and yeah,
yeah, like I mean I loved Carl Sagan when I was a kid. I loved Cosmos. I loved when like the videos we watched in science class were always so interesting to me,
yeah.
but like and that's a big part of why I'm sitting here talking to you now.
But it also
But
doesn't do anything to differentiate you
right.
from any of the other applicants or really make the case that you would be a good
Right.
applicant.
Right.
So,
Right.
again, if you want to include, it doesn't mean you need to purge your essay of anything like personally inspirational. The very first example paragraph that we saw in this presentation was about that,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
getting to see how like this optical
Right.
tool made like cancer therapy
Right. And
better.
right.
But you do want to probably limit those stories to things that happened somewhat closer
Right.
to now.
And you can still have moments of like hot damn, that is the coolest thing.
Yep,
Oh, the first time I saw Maxwell's equations in my Griffith C&M class, or like, or oh, statistical mechanics blew my mind. That like now I know how like
right,
a water molecule is one thing, and then a bunch of them are wet. Like emergent phenomena are the coolest thing ever. Like that's stuff that's like closer to now that has more bearing on your research. You know what I mean?
right.
So
But again, also
yes,
you need to tie that
yeah,
into
right,
your story
right. Which is why I
again,
want to do
not just
complex
have,
system. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because again,
Right.
we all fell in love.
Yeah, yeah, we all like science. We're all nerds. Your professors reading this are going to be nerds, But yeah, again, just
Another,
keep it on you. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Thank you.
on your case.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, another thing is, this essay is about you as a researcher. It's not actually about the science that you've done, if that
Right,
makes sense. So, your job in this essay is not to explain to the committee like how Bose-Einstein condensation works, or
right,
that kind of thing, because first of all, it's being read by professors in your area. They probably know much more than you. You do not want to put your foot in your mouth here. Um,
yeah, but it's not even
but
not wanting to be wrong. Like,
no,
don't be,
that's not
don't, yeah,
even the
yeah,
main thing. The main
right,
thing is that the SOP is about you as a researcher, the things you
hmm,
did, things
right,
you learned, you like took away from those experiences that would contribute to you being a great one in the future as well. So it doesn't really help make your
right,
case to just, you know, by the way, like, here's a paragraph, a
right,
textbook paragraph about,
right. So
this
exactly,
field.
exactly. Yeah, the work is the work. You are you, and when the work comes up, it needs to be about you.
Yeah,
Full stop. And so if you spend a paragraph explaining the science in laborious detail, um, that it can all be absolutely correct and true and insightful, but like keep it on you.
right. So there was that one
Yeah,
example about, I ordered parts from Thor Labs.
right.
Like,
Yeah,
that in some sense can be saying more about you than
right.
just saying like, oh, I know how.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly. The Gross-Matthievsky is a differential equation that
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, something to maybe go light on in your
Hmm.
SOP. Zooming out a little bit further, again, not addressing red flags. They're just, I can't think of a situation with a red flag where you wouldn't want to address it.
Yeah,
And so, uh, do it.
yeah,
And we can work with you
yeah.
about how to frame your specific situation,
Absolutely.
because everyone's will be different. But uh, there's a good there will be a way to do it in a way that works for you. This is a contentious one, lying about your research interests, because kind of statistically, you may know that, for instance, it's easier to get into most grad programs. I shouldn't say easier. There are
By the
more
numbers.
people
Yeah.
accepted generally to grad programs in, for instance, experimental condensed matter than in
Like,
high energy theory.
which is
Um,
largely a function of like things like grant money, how much how much like resources, how much sorry, how many like people you need to run a lab, in
yeah,
condensed matter experiment, how much grants there are, et cetera, and how many faculty there likely are. Like, high
right,
energy theory, there's usually fewer than experiments just by the numbers, right?
right.
So, right,
And
easier doesn't quite have to do with it. It's just about like, these numbers, right?
uh, yeah, and that's kind of just a fact of life. But it's not worth like trying to use that strategically if that's not actually what you want to do. Um,
If I may.
yeah,
Yeah, one of the administrators who did one of the other panels
yes,
at the workshop had said at another event, like, oh, yeah, sometimes we see this where the student has done 3 years of theoretical research and all their letters, and they're applying, and then they say, oh, yeah, I want to do condensed matter experiment. And they're just like, that doesn't square. You know what I
yeah,
mean? That's simply, which, like, by the way, it's okay to have your interests change. Both Lauren and I,
definitely.
when we got to grad school, we like discovered research that we found more fulfilling. But that's a qualitatively different. First of all, professors like know that that happens and that's normal, but that's also a qualitatively different situation than like us like writing our application senior year of college, being like, I cannot wait to do condensed matter theory instead of AMO experiment, so I'm going to write my application as AMO
Right. And
experiment.
again, because most of your SOP is going to be about your past research experience
Yeah,
and how that informs your future,
right.
what you want to do in grad school. So you need a cohesive story there, which doesn't, again, mean that everything needs to be kind of in linear order, like
Hmm.
as an arrow pointing at
Right, right.
like
Yeah,
a dead on target. But uh, this is something that admissions committees do look out for.
right,
Um, like people doing this intentionally and like purely for strategic reasons as opposed to genuine
right, right.
interest. And so it's, we don't think it's worth doing that, basically. Of course, more generally is just lying of any kind. Don't do that, especially in an academic setting where really like even the appearance of dishonesty is a
It's
BFD.
bad enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you guys have written drafts. You've done all the hard work of, going to lab and
Right.
getting stuff done. So how do you revise and how do you get feedback on your SOP? Number one, don't be shy. We know that the SOP is so personal to all of you. It was extremely personal to both of us and probably anyone you ask, really.
Hmm.
And you're really putting your best self forward or your attempt at that. And so we understand it can be like super intimidating, just kind of shopping it around. But it's so important, and it can only get better with more feedback.
Right.
And so pass through your advisors, pass through your postdocs, grad students in your group, ask for their feedback. In person, I've always found is the best because you can go back and forth and like
Yeah.
framing the message that you want to get across and do it as soon as possible.
Hmm.
And a bonus here is that if you share your essay with your letter writers, this will help them. Well, it will help you. They see the facts that you have. They can corroborate them in their own letters. More practically speaking, they have to write their own essay about how
Right.
you're a great student. These are the things
Right.
you've accomplished, and like why you'd be
Hmm.
a great researcher. And if you give them kind of here's a draft of here's a list of all the great things I've done and that kind of thing, it will help them, like
Right.
not to forget contributions you've made and just great things they can say about you. So,
Yeah. And again, corroborating the facts would be useful
mhm.
for the good and the the stuff you're concerned about, like, right, because it
Yeah,
could be, they could say things like, oh, right, like Lauren was a phenomenal student and like, was a great a super pleasure to have in lab. They did in fact train the other two employees on the Thor Labs tool. It was really cool. But they could also say, oh, like even though Lauren, like I taught Lauren twice, like in one class she got a B minus, but like she came to the second semester night and day, came to office hours all the time, like worked really hard, like it was like completely, night and day difference. Like, she's super motivated and qualified, like, and do not hold that against her. Like if they can corroborate the good, the less good, like that can really help you a lot. Yeah, so sharing your essay with your letter grade is a great idea. Sorry.
Stephen's talking about a proverbial Lauren.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
But yeah, that would
that's
be a
right.
great
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Um,
Had to think of a name.
ask anyone, basically like, I don't want to say up the ladder,
Right.
but grad students are great resources, as well as postdocs. You can also ask us. Uh,
Yeah.
we're here for you. As part of this workshop. Uh, Another thing is that you'll probably spend a lot of time like trying to figure out how to put the best you forward rhetorically, and for many reasons, like both just at the surface writing level, but also just like personally, like
If you have instincts towards humility
yeah,
or humbleness, which are generally virtues, like this is a good thing, but like it can be hard to talk about your
yeah,
accomplishments and to not like,
not
not want
feel
to,
like
yeah,
you're
right,
like making false claims.
right.
But imagine that you're your best friend and you're advocating for them, and how would you psych up someone who you have all the facts on paper?
Right.
How are you gonna
Yeah.
like be like, yeah, like you totally deserve this because
Right.
you did X, Y, and Z, and
It's,
that really shows that you're
yeah, you went to Rochester. You working on a paper now on the Gross-Pitayevsky equation. Come on, like that's
right.
awesome.
Yeah,
Like right, imagine literally like a best friend. You're just giving them a pep talk. Like, no, come on, you're an SPS. You do all this outreach. Like you were a TA. You got such great reviews. Come on, like,
or like you
right,
kind of crashed like sophomore year, but look at you now, and
right. You weren't
look at all the
defeated. Yeah,
awesome stuff that you've done since then.
right. Yeah,
And it's like the rubber duck analogy, but like you know take a step back, from yourself, and
yeah.
to better be your own advocate.
That's right.
And also, we want to circle back to this point again, which is one of the first ones we made.
Mm-hmm.
Keep your reader in mind. You're writing for a very specific audience,
Right.
and you want to make sure that they're getting from this essay what you want them to take away. And so, anytime you reread your essay, drafts, you know, look up like every sentence or two
Yeah.
and be like, am I telling them what that specific audience needs to know?
It's kind of a gift. You don't need to worry about writing for an administrator, for your friend, for a grad student. You're writing for a professor.
Yes.
Like you actually like know your audience and write for them.
Is the hardest part of a lot of writing.
Oh
And
yeah, right,
but here,
right.
you have the answer.
That's right. Okay, so at this point in the workshop, various essays were handed out, but they should be included among the materials that you're finding this video in. So we have three different essays, of which we have pulled excerpts from, which were included earlier in the presentation. But also the book that was handed out to the workshop participants who came to Cambridge, the Asher book, page 147 has an interesting excerpt that can maybe helpfully give you some ideas. One thing to briefly clarify about that book is that, like a lot of graduate admissions books, it's trying to kind of meet a lot of needs and hit a lot of targets at once. It's supposed to be for people, sometimes they're written so that they can accommodate folks who are applying for law school, for MFAs, for PhDs in biology, like in different fields. Everything that we've talked about in this presentation has been targeted towards physics graduate school in particular. So just keep that in mind. But not that the principles that they espouse, there could be anything wrong with them. Just, don't be afraid to drill down and think about how this maps onto a physics application in particular.
Yep.
So with this workshop, helped you, sort of feel inspired, here's a sort of like heuristic that you can use to start writing about your research. You might want to build a table of the projects that you've embarked upon, perhaps listing them in order of interest to your reader, which, by the way, will be driven by your interests in graduate school. For example, biophysics, why don't you focus on your biophysics related work first, then other ones? Come up with like a snappy sort of technical title to describe your research projects, and name who they were. The Asher book has on page 63 other examples of how you could sort of carry through this activity. Questions that you can keep in mind, again, at any stage from blank page to final draft. Am I answering the question? What did I do? What did I learn? How did the research matter to me? How am I carrying it into the future? How does it inform my future research? And so on. All right.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here and meet some of you guys and
Yeah.
work with you all.
We're glad that we could be of service. We really hope that this workshop was helpful. And so our email addresses are on the slides. Again, I'm Stephen.
I'm Lauren.
And thanks a lot for listening. There's also during the workshop we got a few questions from the audience that I think we'll just hit on now, because some of them are very, very, very relevant.
Yeah.
So one that came at the very end was, who do I reach out to if I want to find fee waivers? For example, if you're concerned about the burden that your application fees would cost you. The answer is you don't have to know who it necessarily is for every department. What I would do is look up a given school, like look at the like people page or like administrative staff or what have you on the website. Look for someone with the title like coordinator of graduate studies or director of graduate studies or something, and start there. And if you don't, and just like just cold call, just be like, hi, I'm excited to apply to this program, and I have some like financial like burdens, and I would like to apply for a fee waiver. Could you please let me know what the process for that looks like? And even if someone doesn't have that title, don't despair. You could look up somebody with a title of like just any administrator should hopefully be able. Yeah, should hopefully. I mean, you know what I mean. Like these offices aren't that big. They should generally know. Like you're an email or two away from like, oh, like so and so is the person you talk to, and then they'll hopefully coordinate you there. And don't you can pick up the phone, you can email, whatever. If someone's not responding, be persistent.
Right, but that usually works better with administrative staff.
Yes, than professors. Yes, because the professors might not even know how to like access these fee waiver codes, whereas like it might come from like elsewhere in the university, and like navigating the labyrinth of university administration is the administrator's jobs, and so they will be the experts who can guide you through that process. So that would be a person to reach out to. One question we got was, the student was, I believe, a co-author on a paper. That is to say, they were one of the authors on the paper, but not the lead author.
Yeah.
Right. And so
the senior author.
Yeah, right. First or last. Right, exactly. And so the question was, is that still fair game to mention? Answer, absolutely.
Yes. Oh my God.
Emphatically, yes. Lauren, yeah, that's first of all awesome. Good for you. Like legitimately, like Lauren and I didn't have publications when we applied.
Like getting your name on a paper is a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
As an undergrad.
Doesn't matter if you're second to last author, doesn't matter if you're second author, whatever. There are no losers on a winning team. Like you are on a winning team when you do that.
I mean, other things like giving a conference presentation or a poster, I mean, or even if it's just like one of those 10-minute APS physics talks, that's something.
Oh yeah. Because that's a dress rehearsal for grad school. That's a lot like what we do, is talking about our research. One thing, another question that we got as a quick follow-up to that was like, oh, I've done like 5 presentations. Like, do I mention that? Answer, 1. That's awesome. Again, and like that's all like that's all good grist for the mill. I guess I would not mention it. Like, you don't have to say I have presented at APS Physics Arizona, I have presented at APS California, like conference. You can say like I presented at 5 different talks.
In most applications, there will be a place for you to specifically list publications or
presentations
or posters that you've given. So, but if it's not elsewhere in your application, or if it really helps the story along, definitely you should be proud of it and put it in your SOP. W+OCP too.
Yeah, because this is part of the takeaway, part of the follow through, on a given project. Like what we got done is like presenting it, that's a deliverable, full stop. Another question we got was, I have done, student had been, pre-med, I think, in the past, or they had previously been interested in the medical track.
They
And
had
as a
done
result,
research in a medical,
exactly, they had done
setting.
bio research. And so they asked, is that also relevant to mention in a physics application? I would say so, because that's like, there's a lot of transferable skills from one research project to another, be it, performing a literature search or working in the lab or communicating with like grad students, and ideating, formulating, like reading the literature, forming out, what the next step
And
will
just
be.
taking, the time and the effort. Research is not easy in any
Yeah,
field, and
right.
doing the kind of groundwork, even if it's just writing little bits of code here and there that aren't big or sexy or anything, but show that you can get the day-to-day work done, because ultimately that's what you're going to be spending most of your time on
Right.
anyway.
It's the aggregate of day-to-days
Right.
is
And
our
so,
lives in grad school.
I mean, or just if you've been working, like that shows something about you as a researcher that you
Right.
can definitely be cut out for this work.
And always, and again, the real underlying principle, I've said it earlier in the talk, and Lauren has said it too, is that tie it back to you. Just, okay, you did the bio research, like just explain, make it like like very obvious to the research, or sorry, to the professors reading it, like, my experience in bio, yeah.
Such a great candidate.
Right. I have experience coming to a new field and like immersing myself, and I expect that, and these skills will help me as I rotate through labs in my grad school experience, or as I move towards this new field or new directions. Like just make it obvious, give it to them.
Yes.
What other questions were there? There were a lot of questions.
Yeah,
A lot of really good ones, and I don't remember
if you
them.
have any individual ones, you can also, definitely feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we
think,
have a lot of great ones.
yeah. I I think one question we got at some point was, will it mostly be physics people reading it, or is there ever a bio professor or a math professor on a physics department admissions committee? Answer, like, not generally, like, unless, like, really, like, that would probably, I would be very surprised. That'd be very rare, unless there's people with joint appointments. Yeah,
which is not uncommon, and it'll be like,
right.
John Doe professor of physics and
Math or and bio, yeah,
biology or
right,
something.
yeah, um, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's see, what is there anything else? Right. Yeah, so please, dear listener, if you have any further questions for Lauren or I, really don't hesitate to reach out. It would be our pleasure to help you in any way that we possibly can.
Yeah, and thanks for being a part of all this.
Yeah,
The Women of Color project.
that's right.
And keep in touch.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. Hope this helped.